Turn now to the politics of the day. Joining me, our friends and regulars on a Thursday, former Victorian Liberal Party President Michael Kroger and former Labor Minister Stephen Conroy. Gents, great to see you both. Stephen, the budget and Jim Chalmers under a lot of pressure from JobSeeker, the single parenting payments, the defence spend, NDIS, right across the board. Do you think the Albanese government will move when it comes to JobSeeker, for example?
Well, look, at this stage, the indications are no. And what I would say to all of those who are on the sort of left of politics is take a Bex and have a good lie down. If you want to see significant reform of a Labor government, you need a long-term Labor government. You can't do everything in the first budget in the first year. So Jim Chalmers has got many, many demands on him at the moment, and not all of them are going to be satisfied. This is the first real budget. Last year's budget was more of an economic statement. This is the first real Labor budget. And you're not going to be able to satisfy every single ask in the first year. Get a 5, 6, 7-year government and you begin to build in structural reforms, which is what the Albanese government is about. But for those who want to try and say, oh my God, it's not a Labor government, they've sold out, it's just embarrassing drivel.
Michael, the Deputy Prime Minister this week released the Defence Strategic Review. And I discussed this with Richo earlier in the week. I'd be interested in your thoughts on this as well. But it seems to me Prime Minister Albanese does give his colleagues a bit more space than, say, his immediate predecessor might have done, or even you go back to Kevin Rudd. He releases a defence review like this. This is going to be like the Rudd doctrine. It's going to be all about him. With Albanese, he lets Miles do his thing. He lets his ministers do their thing.
Even Stephen's laughing.
Oh, no, I'm nodding in hearty agreement.
It's true.
Look, a good Prime Minister recognises who are his best ministers, and he gives them a licence to do what they do best. And let's be frank about Miles. He's a good minister. He understands geopolitics. He understands the Middle East. He understands the American relationship. And he's edging forward at the correct pace. And so far, I don't think he's made too many blues. I mean, there are some other ministers have made some terrible blues, but not Miles. So I think Albanese's smart enough to know that you can't control everything. It's a terrible thing to say that Kevin Rudd was a control freak, but Stephen would be able to throw more light on it than us. But yeah, it's an interesting prime ministership. Of course, Whitlam wanted to control everything. We probably had one or two that might want to do that as well. And so it's a good prime minister that recognises his strongest ministers and gives them licence to do what they do best, KG.
Yeah, indeed, Stephen. One other thing that marks, if you look at this week and the appearance by Adam Bandt at the press club, they're going to knock off that Housing Future Fund, and the Prime Minister obviously disappointed to, I guess, have that legislation hit the fence. But again, it's a point of difference, say, with the Gillard government, that there was that deal with the Greens. Albanese is not going to be doing any deals or cozying up to the Greens. He saw that up close and personal, and he saw the impact of that, Stephen.
Well, absolutely, and as you say, I think Albo won't make that mistake. I think if you look back to 2010 when that deal was struck, you would probably say, I wouldn't do that again. I think Albo is absolutely right. We'll deal with the Greens on the terms that we were elected by the Australian people. And if the Greens want to defy the will of the Australian people, so be it. It hasn't worked for them so far. They've had to come crawling back from all their lofty rhetoric because it's very much the same situation here. If you want substantial reform and the beginnings of substantial reform, you vote for this package. You can't get everything you want on day one. And so Adam Bandt is just playing himself into irrelevance by making outlandish claims saying, this is what we've got. He's not going to get it. So, sit down at the table and have a discussion about what's possible on the housing package. But it's abolish negative gearing or we vote against you. It's like, OK, you're voting against us. That's insane.
Yeah, and it's almost like they want to have a Michael Kroger, it's almost like the Greens want to have at least something that they're going to stand up against so that they can say to their voters, we're not just following everything that the Albanese government's telling us to.
Yeah, they do. But of course, in the modern era, the Greens operate on the basis, Kieran, that everything has to be a crisis. Everything's an emergency. In order to inspire their followers to get out in the streets and knock on doors and follow the Greens with a degree of urgency, everything has to be a crisis. So we've got the climate emergencies. Everything's an emergency. So the Greens sustain themselves and sustain their support on the basis that everything must change urgently and immediately. Otherwise, the whole planet will either be incinerated or whatever. So this is part of their political playbook. It's a housing crisis that Albo's not coming to the table of. There's a budget crisis. Everything's a crisis for the Greens. So this is just part of their political, the way in which they operate, and so far 12% of the electorate, love it and agree with it, and in many cases fall for it.
Stephen Conroy, the Defence Strategic Review out this week. What did you make of it? Do you think the government hit the mark on it?
Look, I think the review absolutely set out the challenge. I think Steve Smith and Angus Houston deserve credit for being as forthright as they were about our challenges, as forthright about the need for us to change. So I think the review painted the picture, and Richard's now in the process of making a string of announcements that all come as part of the review, and you will see that Australia begins to modernise its kit, as they say, so that we're in a much stronger place to defend ourselves and, more importantly, to project our interests into the Indo-Pacific, especially in coordination and alliance with our partners. So I think the document was spot on. I think it's a credit to the authors, credit to the Minister, and I look forward to seeing Richard roll out the rest of the announcements over the coming weeks.
The Prime Minister also announced, Michael Kroger, this week that he will be meeting with President Biden, the Indian and Japanese leaders as well, May 24 in Sydney for the Quad. Those pictures will be quite something there at the Opera House. And it comes just after Joe Biden said he's going to be running again. It is almost hard to get your head around that he already looks quite frail, but he's going around again. And it could be, It looks like very much it's going to be a rematch on the last one.
It looks that way at the minute. I must say I'm very surprised. I did not think Biden would run again. At his age, he must know his limitations. His wife, Jill, must have told him about the limitations. But you just have this, unnerving feeling that the people around Biden, who are actually running the government, not the Vice President Harris, but the people in Biden's office, the senior Democratic Party officials who are probably running the government, have just said, well, there's nobody else. We've got to beat Trump. Biden's our best hope. Just push him out again. And that's in a nutshell, what they're doing. They do have a problem that there is no clear alternative to him. Gavin Newsom from California, I don't think he'd get elected. Harris certainly wouldn't get elected. Cuomo fell from grace, etc. Beto O'Rourke, hasn't come up as people thought he might, etc., etc. So they're left with Biden. They're not going to give the White House away to the Republicans, certainly not to Donald Trump. Trump's leading DeSantis clearly in the Republican nomination. It looks like a rerun, as you say. And in that rerun, the current polling shows that Biden will win again, which is really not good for America and it's not good for the world, let's be frank.
The way you characterise that was really interesting in terms of basically just pushing him out again, Stephen Conroy, because he's the best option against Trump. Is that what we're seeing him?
Look, I can't disagree with anything Michael said. I think at the moment there's no one quite ready to step up to beat Trump. And the single most important thing in Democrat minds and the Democrat voting base is we have to defeat Trump. So that means if we've got to vote for, and put forward Biden again, well, Michael, stop picking on Grandad. What have you got against your Grandad? He's a safe pair of hands. But I agree, there's a good team around him in the White House. You've got very competent cabinet members, and the economy's starting to come through the trough that it's been in and going through with the interest rate. So I think Biden's absolutely the best option. for the Democrats for a whole range of reasons.
I got nothing against my granddad, mate. It's just he's not alive.
Yeah. God rest his soul.